Hi, my name's Maria, and this is my channel, Maria Might Read That, and today I'm here to do a video that I've been planning for a little while and have just been really excited to film. And basically it's part one in this new series that I'm calling Do I Know My Own Reading Tastes? And what I'm going to be doing in part one is telling you about 10 series that are absolute top priority for me and that I want to get to, and then I'm going to be ranking them from 1 to 10, kind of in the order of how much I think I'll like it. So predicting where I think they'll fall, and then I'll revisit this when I've read them. I might do a part two check-in because there's 10 series and that does take a long time to get. So it's not really like an end of year TBR. This will take me much longer. So if I feel like it's taking me too long, I might do a check-in, but otherwise you'll get a part two or part three, which would be the final results and where they actually ranked compared to where I predicted that they would rank. If I DNF one of these, that will be ranked accordingly, or if I just lose interest, again, that will be ranked accordingly. So even if I don't get all of them, that will kind of play into how they end up ranking in the finals. All 10 of these are series, there's no standalones, and I tried to pick mostly series that had at least 2 books out, but there are 2 on here that just have the 1 book out for now, and I looked around for other things, but none of them were as high priority as these specific 2 that I just really wanted to talk about and include in this list. So they're there because I make the rules and I wanted them to be there. And before we get into the actual predictions of the rankings, let's play a little game about how well do you know my reading tastes. Once you've seen me talk through this list of 10, let me know in the comments down below what you think my number 1 spot will end up being in actuality, or what my top 3 will be if you can kind of predict as far as that goes. I'd love to hear what your predictions are for my reading taste and whether or not you agree with my predictions and where I put them. These series also function as my kind of top 10 priority list for both the end of the year and going into, so far, the beginning of next year. So if you've been following along with my TBR videos where I goal set, one of the categories that I pick books for based on a goal is a book off of my top priority list. And so for those of you who may have been interested to see that list, this is it. So starting with number 10, and just before I give you this one, let's preface it by saying that because of the nature of rankings, something has to be at the bottom. But again, this is my top 10 kind of priority series list that I'm just really excited to get to. So I'm excited for every single one of them, and I think they all have the potential to be favorites, but because of the nature of things, something had to be ranked lowest, and for that, at number 10, I'm putting First Law by Jo Abercrombie. The reason that I'm really excited to get to this series is because the very first thing I hear people talk about the series is always the characters. Everyone raves about the characters. They say that they're super well written, they say that they're very memorable, they're very likable despite being characters in a grim, dark, and kind of very corrupt world and being very almost anti-hero characters. Everyone has just such an attachment to the characters, and I've also heard that the very first book is very character-driven focused, and there's not even really a plot until you get into the second and third book. So all of those things are things that I typically love. I'm a very character-driven reader, and I love complex characters. The reason that this is ranked lowest is because I feel like it's a series that could end up either in the number 1 spot, and it will just be my brand, new, absolute top favorite, or it'll be a 10 because I will either love it or I'll hate it. It'll be like a 1 star or a 5 star. I think that's where this is gonna fall. I think that if the characters click, it will just be one of those series that I never stop raving about. But on the other hand, the kind of grim, dark world might not be for me. I've heard that the ending is kind of almost doom and gloom, or just kind of a bit depressing, and I don't know if that will quite work for me. And also I've just been burned a little bit by Robin Hobb, who everyone also, the first thing to talk about with her is the character. So I'm a little nervous that Abercrombie could be a similar thing for me, but hopefully I fall into the absolutely love it spectrum and it actually ends up at number 1. I'd be happy if I was wrong on this one. At number 9, we have the Chalion series. First book is Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold. This one's often mentioned alongside The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison and the Thief series by Megan Whalen Turner as having just incredible characters that are likable and inspiring, having kind of good-heartedness at the center, being a very almost feel-good, cozy sort of writing style or series. And I love those other 2 that I mentioned, Goblin Emperor and The Thief. They're among my absolute favorites, and I'm hoping that I'll have a similar experience where this kind of just fits that niche really well. I've heard that this is political, and someone also described the author as sort of like Jane Austen, where what they most focus on is the characters and their relationships in a kind of constraint-ridden society. All of that sounds great. The reason that this is not higher up in the rankings is because even though this is a series, they're more like companion books. I just think I'll feel less attached because of that. I think that when I have multiple books to follow a specific character or multiple characters through, I think that I'll I just tend to get more attached. So if it's more companion books, I usually just have less of an attachment to it. So I think it might just lose out to a few of these other ones a little bit, but I'm still absolutely hoping to love it. At spot number 8, I have Burning Blade and Silver Eye, the first book of which is Ashes of the Sun, and this is by Django Wexler. What I know about this is that it features sibling dynamics at the heart of it, and the siblings are kind of torn between their familial bond to each other and also opposing loyalties and goals. Both Cassidy from Covers with Cassidy and Mel from Mel Lenore Reads recently read this and absolutely loved it. I've heard that this has great character moments, that it's political, that it has a fun kind of genre blending style of almost like sci-fi with fantasy and a few other things, and also that the side characters are memorable and fantastic, and all of that again sounds great to me. I think that the thing that could hold this back though is that it might be more of a plot-driven series from what I hear, but again with great characters, so that's promising. And then the other thing is that the siblings are separated for at least the majority of, I believe, the first book. I don't know if they get reunited later on. I hope that they do. I think for me that just might mean that even though sibling dynamics are a big focus of the book, at the same time we might not get as many of the interactions between them, direct interactions, as I would like. So again, that's just kind of why it's at this spot in the list. At number 7, we have the Threadlight series, the first book of which is Voice of War, and this is by Zach Argyle. Similarly to Ashes of the Sun, this also has family dynamics, which is a definite buzzword for me. I know that this one explores parenthood a bit more, which again I love seeing in books. People say that this has great character development, and I also hear a lot of praise for the way that Zach Argyle writes female characters, which from my experience not every male writer does well, so I'm really excited for that. I did watch an interview recently where Zach was on Taylor's channel from Made Between the Pages. I forget what that series is called, but I'll link it down below. They do kind of an author interview series, and he was talking about how his partnership with his wife really informs the way that he writes female characters, and how she's his beta reader and has a lot of feedback for him and just helps him kind of flesh that out in a way that he might not have the experience himself to do. And so it sounds like that really shows in the writing, and that just really excites me. This is a self-pub series, I should mention as well. The reason that this is at number 7 on the list is mostly because a lot of the reviews that I've seen for this focus on the action and kind of the plot again of the story, and then I also hear a lot of comparisons to Sanderson and how great the magic system is, which are all great things but not necessarily kind of my big key buzzwords. I prefer more character-driven, more political, so it just didn't rank as high as some other kind of, again, character-driven, more political stories that you'll see a little bit higher up, but again, still hoping to love this. Getting into number 6, we have The Faithful and the Fallen. The first book is Malice, and this is by John Gwynne, and this is the only series on the list that I actually have started, so I do have a little bit more of an informed kind of opinion here. I also believe this is the only author on this list that I've read works from before. So I have read the first book of his other series, which was Shadow of the Gods, and I really enjoyed that. The Faithful and the Fallen, from what I've both read so far and heard, has a lot to do with themes of kind of good and evil, justice, corruption, themes of integrity and doing what's right. It has a mix of kind of good and bad characters where some are clearly good, some are clearly bad, and then some mixed in there that are much more morally gray. One thing that I can say for John Gwynne, again from kind of my experience reading him so far, is that he just is good at writing characters that you grow to really root for and care for. I wasn't blown away by Malice. I do think that just in comparison to his later series, you can see that his writing was a bit weaker, which makes sense. Malice was his debut, and I just kind of read him backwards in his backlist, so I think it suffered a little bit from that just because I could sense that it was a little bit weaker, but overall I'm really excited for the series, and I do think that it's going to improve with every book, and just I imagine it cementing a place in my heart. Alright, we're now at the halfway point and getting into spot number 5, which goes to The Dark Water Legacy. The first book is The Ember Blade, and this series is by Chris Wooding. This is one of those series that only has one book out so far, but I believe the next one, the sequel, is supposed to come out at the beginning of 2023. This is one that Murphy from Murphy Napier absolutely raves about all the time. She says that it just has such a well-written friendship at the heart of it and a great found family aspect, and friendship is such a big buzzword for me. I love friendship relationships. Again, I love family sibling dynamics, like those kind of platonic exploring, just like those sort of bonds really intrigues me, and I love nothing more than digging into just a really strong, good friendship and seeing kind of how that can be tested. Petrick from Petrick Leo has said that the author of this book places the highest value on friendship and honor. Honors and kind of justice is another really big buzzword or key theme for me that I really love exploring in books. I've heard the characters are nuanced and that their high ideals are tested, so it's not always clear what the right or wrong answer is, and the book kind of almost asks the question of what makes a hero, which one of my things that I love most is exploring nuance of kind of justice and good and evil, and not even necessarily evil because that seems so black and white, but kind of exploring what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do. Is there sometimes just two wrong things but one's less wrong, or kind of an impossible choice, but how do you make it? Do you not make it? I love exploring that conflict, because I feel like that's so applicable to our real life as well, and I've been in those situations myself, so on a bigger kind of fantasy scale, of course, in the books, but I love that exploration and that nuance, and when an author can really manage that. One of my all-time favorite series, The Aurelian Cycle by Rosaria Munda, does just an incredible job of this, where it just, again, looks at kind of the nuances of what is right and wrong, and what do you do when you're faced with an impossible choice. And then my other favorite series, The Great Coats by Sebastian de Castell, again, looks at kind of what is justice and what does that mean to each individual person. So like I said, those tend to just be things that really, when done right and when dug deep enough into, it's a perfect story, especially when you add friendship on top of that. That's just like perfection for me. I ranked other series a little bit higher in this list, but honestly I wouldn't be surprised if The Ember Blade ends up being like in the top 3. I just have such a good feeling about it. The thing that kind of holds me back, and the reason it is at number 5 and just a little bit lower than the others in the predictions, is because it is classic fantasy. So it's almost kind of, I've heard it described as Lord of the Rings sort of story and inspired. And again, I just tend to like political, more like almost court or society-based plots more than I like classic fantasy that follows kind of either a quest or different races like elves and things like that. That's just less interesting to me personally, but I've heard it's classic fantasy with a modern twist, so it might be something that that doesn't bother me as long as the rest of the story is done well. At number 4, we have Hostage of Empire by S.C. Emmett, and the first book is Throat of the Five Winds. I talked about this in a recent, I think it was my July TBR, and I talked about how perfect this sounded for me and how excited I was to get to it, because it just sounds like an underrated book. I never hear anyone talk about it, but when I read kind of the reviews and just heard more about it, it sounds like it will tick every box for me. I've heard that it's character driven with well-developed characters and just incredible female characters. I heard it's about women navigating their place in society and court. It's a political driven fantasy with lots of court intrigue. Apparently there's also family dynamics in there, and I've heard I think one person compare it to The Goblin Emperor, so again, that just has me excited based on how much I loved that other book. I don't know why this isn't more talked about, but it seems that the one kind of main criticism that a lot of reviewers seem to have is that it just is a bit slow to start and a bit of a slog, so that seems to affect people's enjoyment of the book overall or cause them to DNF early on. I don't love reading a slog book, but I do like slow, kind of character-driven books, so for me slow has almost become a buzzword rather than an anti-buzzword. So depending on how well it's done, if it's slow but gripping, I think that again this just could work really well for me. At spot number 3 we have The Gentleman Bastards by Scott Lynch, and the first book is The Lies of Locke Lamora. This is another Murphy Napier rec, again just heavy focus on friendship and just a very kind of almost bromance deep friendship between the two main characters, Locke and Jean. I know it has a heist at the core of it and just really fun kind of group of found family con artists, I guess I could call them. I hear that the banter is great, and I love good banter. Sebastian de Castell in Great Coats just writes amazing banter, and if done well, that is just gold for me. I love kind of witty banter between characters and friends. Again, I hear that we kind of see the friendship tested a bit, and that it is a very character-driven book, and that there's flashbacks about the character's past that then informs kind of the present timeline, and we see how that affects who they are and just fleshes them out even more, and that all sounds really great to me. I think that this is one that I've been intimidated to read, but I just have such a feeling that once I do actually get to it, it will be an all-time favorite. I think the reason I've been intimidated by it though is because I read like a snippet of it at one point, and the writing style just seemed a bit dense and kind of almost not leaning toward older fantasy, but like not quite modern fantasy in the sense like it was big paragraphs and lots of description, so I don't know how well that writing style will work for me. Hopefully once I get past kind of being introduced to it, it works really well. And I do know also again that it has kind of banter and humor and profanity, which if not done well can be something that's a big deterrent for me. Humor in books is kind of can go either way for me, and it just either works or it doesn't, so hopefully it works for me in this case and is a bonus rather than a negative. Gentleman Bastards has also been highly recommended to me by my friend Marybeth from Marybeth Dwells in Books, and she knows my tastes perfectly. Like her and I align in general on books, and we tend to have the same feeling about characters, and when she says that I'm gonna love something, it's guaranteed pretty much that I'll love it, so I think that that's going to be the case here. And I just trust her implicitly, so again, that's a strong point in its favor and why it's so high up on this list. Alright, we are at the second spot prediction, and that is going to go to The Tainted Dominium by Crystal Matter. I swore I was going to look up how to pronounce her name, and then I forgot to before the video, so apologies if I said it wrong. And the first book is Legacy of the Brightwash. This is the second series on this list that only has one book out so far. I don't believe there's any news or kind of scheduled date for the sequel, but I just have such a good feeling about this one. It's going on here anyway. What I know about this, I know that this is a rec from Taylor from Made Between the Pages, and also Esmay from Esmay Roslin, both of whom I also absolutely trust as far as their bookish tastes and recommendations go. I think we have so much overlap and so much in common, and when they recommend something, it goes really high up on my TBR, and then I also just have a really strong feeling that it will be something I love. We have a lot of favorites in common, like I said. And they have both been absolutely raving about this book. I believe both of them gave it 5 stars. It's one of their all-time favorite books of the year that they read it in. And I've just heard nonstop great things. I've heard that it has characters you can't stop thinking about, themes of justice, a big emphasis on political scheming. Again, you'll see a trend here. These are all things and buzzwords that I look for, so you're also getting a sense of my reading tastes. I've heard that it is a brutal world, but that it has pockets of hope, which sounds like the exact kind of balance that I like. I don't mind a dark world, but I do want there to be hope in it. I'm gonna read you some things because I feel like these sum up why this is so high up on this list better than I could. First off, the blurb on the back of the book, which says, "Follow the law and you'll be safe. But what if the law is wrong?" So again, themes of law, justice, right, wrong, kind of things being more nuanced than they might seem at first. Love that. Then Taylor's review specifically says that it's a main character on a journey to find their own moral compass, and that this is a book that will make you look inwards at yourself and kind of question what it means to give or receive justice. Again, just not only delving into those themes and nuances, but making you question it as the reader. Just is like, if a book can make me go that extra step and make me consider my own kind of values and ideals and morals, that is a book that has a profound impact on me, typically speaking. And then Esmay's reviews said that this story is filled with love, heartache, joy, pain, desire, hurt, regrets. It's all there, all the emotions in all caps. And the only other thing I love more than delving into kind of deep nuances of morality is emotional stories about that. So if a story can get really emotional, again, I'm so there. Again, that's why I love Greatcoats so much. It just is such, I feel like it's not a plot-driven or a character-driven story, it's an emotional-driven series, so that's just what I love the most about it, and that's what I'm excited to find here. And finally, at the #1 spot, I have predicted that Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu, the first book of which is Grace of Kings, will take the #1 spot. I just have a feeling that this is going to be a new all-time absolute favorite for me. Funnily enough, or not, because again, their recommendations I trust implicitly. We have yet another series that both Taylor and Esmay highly recommend. Taylor has said that the series is right up there with Greenbone Saga for her, and I am obsessed with Greenbone Saga, so they do kind of give me similar vibes based on what I'm going to talk about. I do feel like they're very different, but I feel like they're the same scope and focus, if that makes sense, as each other from what it sounds like. We have a large-scale epic scope story that spans many years, and we get to see characters really grow, change, see political climates and countries grow, change during that kind of big time span, which is something that I loved about Greenbone Saga. I hear that, again, it's very political. Political fantasy is my jam, if I didn't already make that clear. Apparently it's about the different inner workings of different countries, which again just gives me a Greenbone Saga kind of vibe. Bookborn, whose channel I also love, describes it as kind of a slow burn, so it's slow but not boring, which again is that perfect, it sounds like, combo for me. And I hear that it's a lot of setup, but it has a huge payoff later, which I don't mind. I don't mind kind of being there for the setup to then see the big aftermath play out and to really get that big satisfaction. And again, this one I hear is about complex female characters and their role in history, which you'll have heard me mention a few of these other top 10, and so just another thing that I really look for in books. But it does get very dark, I hear. I hear that it has a big focus on kind of technology or inventions that the author himself has also then kind of actually made in real life and tested out, which isn't like the most intriguing to me, but maybe I'll really appreciate it. And I do hear a lot of people say that the writing style or perspective takes getting used to and can also be a bit of a deterrent. It is third person omniscient, so it feels a bit distant, especially in the first book from what I hear, and you don't feel like you're really kind of attached to or there with the characters. But I hear that from the start of the second book, that distant feeling is kind of resolved and people feel really invested and attached to the characters. So I think that this is one that will probably maybe take a few books to earn its spot high up on the list, but I do think that in the end it will get there. Okay, so those are my predicted rankings for fantasy series at the top of my priority list. I'm so curious to read these and find out kind of, was I right, was I wrong, do I know my own reading tastes, or will I have to reevaluate how I pick my books that I want to read? Again, please play a game with me down in the comments and let me know if you think my #1 would be something different. I'd love to hear your predicted rankings for me, or let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these and what your thoughts on them were. I need to get going on reading all of these so that I can come back to you soon with an updated kind of final part 2 or part 3, depending on if I do a check-in or not, with an updated next part of this video series letting you know where these actually stacked up. I hope to find a lot of 5-star reads and all-time favorites among this group. As always, thanks so much for watching and chatting with me, and I hope you have a lovely day.